believe in the ripple effect.
What's up? Another episode of Ripple Effect Podcast. I'm your host, Ricardo Verandas, also known as Ricky Verandas, and a great conversation for you today. Today we have returning guest, Robb Wolf. He's also the founder and creator of one of my favorite products and a sponsor of the podcast, Element Electrolytes. And it's a true honor to have them as a sponsor because I've been a fan of Robb Wolf's for a long time. I've been listening to him on tons of health and nutrition podcasts. I've heard him on the Rogan podcast. I've seen him pop up on so many great documentaries like The Perfect Human Diet, which I highly recommend. And CJ Hunt, the creator of that documentary, has been on the show. But if you're looking for documentaries to watch Sacred Cow, which is one of Robb Wolf's newest documentaries, and it's a book. So please check that out. I'll put links in the show description. But like I mentioned, in regards to my worldview and my influences and inspirations in regards to diet, nutrition, and health, Robb Wolf was a huge part of that. So I can't thank him enough for taking time out of his busy day to come on the show and go down so many different rabbit holes in regards to, is meat bad for you? Why are we demonizing it? The attempt to turn food into intellectual property. We talk about climate change. We talk about so many different things. We debunk so many myths in health and food and nutrition. So I know you're going to really enjoy this conversation. But as always, before we get to the conversation, I have to remind you this is a value for value show. If you get some value out of these discussions, out of these podcasts, please consider giving some value back. Of course, it doesn't have to be financial. Rate, review, share the show, and that will help fight against the algorithms that are suppressing conversations and podcasts like these. Shows like today's has a lot of information that I think can help a lot of people, that a lot of people can find interesting, that it can also help a lot of people brainstorm what is causing some of their health issues or how to optimize your body and mind. So these are type of great conversations you can share, put on your social media platform, tell people about it, and start your own little ripple of change. With that said, if you can financially support the show, if you're in a good financial situation, please consider financially supporting the Ripple Effect podcast. No donation is too little. And if you can donate to the show, we have a Venmo account. If you want to send a one-time donation, PayPal. We have a crypto wallet. We have a merch store. If you want to check out some hoodies, t-shirts, hats, mugs, all types of stuff, please check out the merch store. You can find the link in the show description or on my website. And you can also go to the merch store directly by going to the Ripple Effect Podcast merch.com. And you can also support the show by checking out our sponsors. The first sponsor is Content Safe. Matt from Content Safe has created my website. He protects all my videos and podcasts. He also syncs all my channels together. So he has tons of services and tons of ways of helping out a content creator, a YouTuber, a streamer. Please check out Matt from Content Safe. Let him know you're a listener of the Ripple Effect podcast, and he'll hook you up, and he can save you tons of uploading time because, like I said, he syncs all my video channels together. So you only have to upload your videos to one platform. Then magically, and I always say magically because I don't know how he does it, but magically it appears on all my other channels that I have on Rumble and Band.video and Rockfin, Odyssey, BitChute, and many more. Another sponsor is the University of Reason, created by past guest and friend of the Ripple Effect podcast, Richard Grove. So if you're at a crossroads in life, if you're looking to connect with a freedom-minded, libertarian-minded community, check out the University of Reason, check out his popular autonomy courses, and see how it can help you maybe expand on some skills, learn some new skills, and maybe open a new door to a new journey in life. So the autonomy courses is a great way of possibly helping yourself and contributing to the Ripple Effect podcast at the same time. And my last sponsor is, of course, Element Electrolytes, created by my guest, Robb Wolf, and we open up our discussion with the origin story of Element Electrolytes. So I won't expand too much about Element Electrolytes in the intro because you're going to hear all about it, why it works, what it can help with, and much more in our conversation. But if you want to support the show and if you want to stay hydrated and you want something that is healthy, good for you, and can relieve you of many symptoms due to dehydration, check out Element Electrolytes. Use the link in the show description or on my website and get a free gift with every purchase. And afterwards, every time you purchase Element Electrolytes, you are contributing to the Ripple Effect podcast. So another way of staying healthy, helping you optimize your body and mind, and contributing to the Ripple Effect podcast. I think that's finally it, guys. Enjoy this amazing information-dense conversation with Robb Wolf, and I'll talk to you guys in the next one.
I've been tinkering with low-carb, keto-ish diets for 23 years. I got into it because I developed a pretty severe case of ulcerative colitis back in my mid-20s. I'm 5'9". I'm about 170 pounds right now. When I was at my sickest with ulcerative colitis, I was still 5'9", but I was about 125, 130 pounds. So like, if you imagine 50 pounds less of me, like I'm not a big guy. So if you imagine 50 pounds less of me, like I was in pretty rough shape. And that's a whole long story, how this idea of like a paleo keto type diet might be helpful for me, but it got on my radar. I tinkered with it, and it saved my life. And it was so life transforming that it kind of pulled me out of the track that I was on to go to medical school. And I ended up opening what was then the first CrossFit affiliate gym in the world, and then ultimately went on to open the fourth CrossFit affiliate gym in the world, and wrote some books and did all that type of stuff. Have tinkered with my diet along the way. I've tried reintroducing more carbs and doing fermentable fiber and safe starches and everything. And for me, I just seem to do pretty well at that kind of lower fiber, kind of, carnivore-ish kind of interface. And I generally have motored along pretty well. Like I've had decent performance at most things, but I was involved with CrossFit very early on. I've done martial arts pretty much my whole life. I've been in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu, and these legit combative sports are really glycolytically demanding. Like they tend to tap into that glycolytic pathway disproportionately relative to a lot of other activities. And it's been onerous for me. Like it just beat up and dragged out and not really feeling great when I do things like high intensity intervals or jujitsu. And I just kind of thought that was my lot in life. It's like, if I'm going to feel good and not have gut issues, and I also have some autoimmune stuff that I manage with diet, this is just the way it's going to be. But I've always been tinkering and looking, and I remember I was doing some searches, kind of Google searches, and it was ketogenic diet, jujitsu success. I think was the thing that I put in there. And what was interesting is I found a number of women who were keto fueled and winning world championships and really crushing it. And which was interesting because there's a lot of hubbub that, like keto is going to destroy a woman's menstrual cycle and all kinds of stuff like that. So it was interesting. What I was noticing is that the people that were the most successful tended to be women, although there were men in there also. And they were having great success with this ketogenic diet. It really helped them to maintain their weight for competition, and I started poking around at what they were up to, and one of the guys that was coaching them, Luis Villaseñor, I basically like stalked him until I could get him to, look at what I was up to and, hey, give me some feedback on what I'm doing. He's like, I think all your macros are on point, like the protein, carbs, fat are probably fine, but I don't think you're getting enough sodium, enough electrolytes, and specifically sodium. And when he first told me this, I was like, oh, no, I salt my food. I'm good. Like, I'm not afraid of salt, and he probably rolled his eyes so hard that his head nearly fell off of his shoulders, but because I'm sure he's experienced this before. But it took me about a year of continued flailing and struggle. And then finally, Luis did something that was pretty smart. He's like, hey, man, why don't you just weigh and measure all your food and also account for all of the electrolytes that you're consuming, basically the sodium, and let's just look at where you're at. And he said, I would really like to see you at least 5 grams of sodium per day, 5,000 milligrams of sodium per day. And when I did that over the next week, I was consistently getting less than 2 grams of sodium per day. Because if you're eating minimally processed whole foods, even when you're salting the heck out of your food, it is a remarkable amount of sodium to get to a gram, to get to 1,000 milligrams. So he was basically like, hey, the next time you work out, do you like pickle juice? I'm like, yeah, I love pickle juice. Like, the stuff's great. He's like, okay, take about 6 to 8 ounces of it, shoot it down, go work out, get back to me. And I did it, and it was like the first time that I'd had a pump in like 15 years, and I felt great. And it was just like my brain was on. Everything was on. Everything was clicking. And he was like, yeah, you've been probably chronically deficient in sodium for like at this point, this was about 6 years ago, 5 years ago, 6 years ago. So yeah, I guess six years ago at least. He was like, you've been chronically deficient in sodium for 20 years, basically, and it was so striking to me because I was like, oh my God, like this is a huge issue for me. And when I started rethinking what electrolytes do, every nerve impulse you have, every muscle contraction, every heartbeat is driven by sodium potassium pumps. It's basically driven and maintained or monitored by your electrolyte status. And so I started thinking about all of the struggles that I had, all the struggles that the folks that follow me had likely had over the years. I was like, oh my God, like this is like the problem that people face when they're eating this kind of minimally processed whole food, lower carb diet, because 85% of the sodium that Americans consume comes from processed foods. And if you shift to a minimally processed diet, just by default, you end up consuming far, far less sodium. And then the flip side of that, and this is true whether you're keto or vegan or what have you, but when your glycemic load decreases, when the amount of carbohydrate matter that you consume decreases, and when it's less processed, we tend to get less of an insulin response off of our food. And a lower insulin environment causes us to retain less sodium. It's called the natriuresis of fasting. So if you're legitimately eating a clean, low-carb diet, like you just dump sodium like crazy. So when I put all this stuff together and realized how important this likely was, I realized that there were a ton of people struggling in this space from lack of electrolytes. And so we put together this free downloadable guide about how to make your own keto aid, is what we called it. And it was basically like this much salt, this much no salt, which is potassium chloride, some magnesium citrate, lemon juice, stevia, water, shake it up and go. And we didn't use it as a lead magnet. Like, we were totally unsophisticated with it. We just posted this thing. We're like, hey, we think that electrolytes are really important. Here's a way for you to get yours. And within 6 months, we had like 500,000 downloads of this thing. Like, it was crazy. And the reports that we were getting from people were nothing short of like jaw dropping. Like, oh, my sleep is better. My recovery is better. I've been tracking HRV for 5 years, and I do okay. But when I consistently upped my electrolytes, my HRV score dramatically improved, on and on and on. And so we were getting this really robust feedback that people were benefiting from improving their electrolyte status, specifically tackling the sodium piece. And but we also started getting tagged on social media where folks were saying, hey, this keto aid is great, but it sucks when I travel because TSA doesn't like the 3 bags of white powder that I'm traveling with. And, could you guys ever think about doing like some sort of a convenient, stick pack or something like that? So we started looking into that, and it was interesting. I had a feeling that the element was either going to go to the moon, or it was going to be like a plane into a mountainside. Like, it was going to be no middle ground at all. And so far, knock on wood, like it's done really, really well. I believe it is one of the fastest growing health and wellness companies in the world right now. So it's doing really well. And on the formulation side, part of the way that we arrived at that was looking at the natriuresis of fasting and how much fluids and electrolytes people lose when they're on their low carb diets. But we also just looked at general population wide numbers, like some really interesting studies have come out in the last couple of years that look at all-cause mortality and where the low ebb of that as it relates to sodium intake. And what's interesting is there's kind of a U curve where all-cause mortality is high, and then it gets down to a low ebb at about 4 to 6 grams of sodium per day, and then it starts going up. But the upside is interesting, that it's a flatter curve. Like you have to be at about 8 grams of sodium intake per day for an average population to be as at risk for death or illness as at 2 grams per day. So it's pretty clear in the literature that too little sodium is far more dangerous than too much sodium, at least for the vast majority of people. And so that helped to inform the way that we put the formulation together. And also we just looked at the diet records of about 200, 300 people that were tracking their food in chronometer, and just looked at what they were deficient in. And they seemed to get adequate calcium for the most part. They were a little skinny in magnesium, more deficient in potassium, and they were really woefully deficient in sodium. And so that's the whole way that we put that together. It was informed from looking at diet records from folks, and then also kind of looking at some of the research and epidemiology around all-cause mortality and where people operate their best with regards to sodium and electrolyte intake. And then at the upper bound, there's some work from the American Council of Sports Medicine where they suggest for hard-charging athletes, particularly in hot or humid environments, upwards of 7 to 10 grams of sodium per day. So that's kind of where we ended up bracketing the lower end, the upper end. And then as far as the ratios and formulation, that was really informed by looking at the dietary records of a couple of hundred people and just trying to literally fill the gaps on that.
Well, anybody who plays sports knows when you sweat, what you taste is typically a lot of salty sodium.
Yeah.
Majority of what you're sweating out. So that's why, and there's so many myths in the diet and health and nutrition world. My last guest was actually a gamer, a world famous Brazilian gamer who had a horrible health, and then he changed his diet from completely changed his diet from eating processed foods to he kind of became a vegan, raw foodish type person, which I don't subscribe to, but I think that it was an interesting story because I've had Dr. Dominic D'Agostino on, I've had Dr. Sean Baker, I've had all these people, and I'm like, okay, I want people to see that there are some similarities with all these diets, and it's not one size fits all with everybody. It's same thing with sleep. I wanted to ask you about sleep too, because I'm curious if sleep is similar to exercise and diet, where it's not one size fits all. It's like in general, 9 hours of sleep is good for you, or more sleep is better. Matthew Walker's book, Why We Sleep, and his interviews are fascinating. And it seems like the more sleep you get, the better everything gets. But with me, it's not the case. Like if I get more than 8 hours of sleep, I'm a zombie all day, and I can't snap out of it. But the thing is, so for people who think like, okay, well, how many element little packets can I have in a day that before it's unhealthy? Or is I know stevia is looked at as a good alternative to sugar. I won't get you out of ketosis or fasting, but is there a certain amount of stevia that's not good for you? I drink these from time to time, the Jocko Goes, and I like these too because there's it's sweetened with stevia. I brought a bunch of stuff because this is like what people I don't eat during the day, so these are like my little snacks from time to time. And then the kombucha, another good one, sugar free. But is there? So it's like could people make the same mistake as they used to do with sugar, where like, oh, I'm looking at the fat content, but I'm just ignoring the sugar content. Like, is there a certain amount of stevia that we should be looking at that, or is there no real science or research. And I also like to get your opinion on sucralose, because there is some conflicting opinions on, like, okay, is there any real good research showing that it's harmful? Is it not? I mean, I like to look at like monk fruit or stevia, because at least I know what it's coming from and it's a natural source. But I know some people don't like the tardiness or whatever, the bitterness of some of those sweeteners. To me, it's a small price to pay to consume something that's better for me. But the guy who what's his name, who debated Dr. Dominic D'Agostino on the Rogan podcast, he has a pre-workout called Outworked, and I like his formula. But he's super smart, but has sucralose in it. So I'm like, maybe I need to rethink sucralose. Maybe it's not as harmful. So not to throw 100 things at you and didn't tell you to expand on it. But yeah, I mean, what's your opinions on some of those things?
So I'm a biochemist by training, and I did a fair amount of toxicology research, and so I think about the world in a lot of those terms when I'm thinking about this stuff. And I think a lot. I also sit on the board of directors of a medical risk assessment program. So we do medical risk assessment around orthopedic stuff and around metabolic screening. So I also think about risk reward all the time. So like this is just kind of where my head is. And when I see folks in the health and fitness space freaking out about artificial sweeteners, I'm kind of like, if there's 12 things to be worried about, that's probably number 13. Like it's are you sleeping adequately each night? Have you figured out a strategy for just controlling calories? Are you doing resistance training 3 days a week? Are you doing some zone 2 cardio 2 to 4 days? Like, there's all this other stuff. Are you getting out in the sun and getting sun on your skin? There's all these things that we know for a fact are so good for us. And then on this artificial sweetener and also the natural sweetener front, there are folks that are like religious about it, that it's going to kill you. It's the worst thing in the world for you. I do think that some folks are sensitive to any or all of these and may have gut issues. And like, I really don't, other than some of the things like erythritol. I'll get the trots from it. Like if I did, a cookie or something, that a keto cookie with too much erythritol, I can have one, but I go to have the second one and like I'm dashing for the bathroom. But that's kind of my, that's a very self-limiting thing too. It's gonna contribute to me not overeating it. But I think broadly these non-nutritive sweeteners are pretty darn safe. There's some research that suggests that maybe in some circumstances we see some negative alterations in the gut microbiome, but I'm really at a loss to see how that is the primary problem that folks are having. Now, that said, I did have clients for whom the non-nutritive sweeteners, like a diet soda or something, it was kind of like the gateway drug. They would get that really intense sweet, and then they would want other things, and it actually made dietary compliance more difficult. But I've also seen the exact opposite, where people are like, dude, you can take everything away, but I still want my Diet Coke, and that's the one thing that's going to keep me online. So I think that that's something that if you are coaching people, you just have to be flexible around that whole story. Like, is it facilitating them finding a route to calorie control and overall, maintenance of their diet, or is it tripping them up? And I again, I've just kind of seen that on both sides.
So
Stevie,
why?
I think. Oh yeah.
I was just gonna say. So obviously you use stevia, or you use the stevia leaf in your
Yep.
products. Jocko uses it in his. I know Old School Labs uses it in their pre-workout. Why do certain companies like Element, yourself, choose stevia over something else?
Ours was so we knew no matter which one we picked, there were going to be some people that hated it. Like that, so it was impossible that we were going to make everybody happy, which is also why we have the raw unflavored. So it has no flavors, no sweetener, and then we also still have our homebrew recipe, and we expand that all the time. We have like 19 different ways to brew your own from home, and you don't have to buy ours at all. We just want to make sure that you hydrate properly. Ours was 100% a deal of within stevia, monk fruit, and some of those types of things. I'm very comfortable with like their toxicological risk profile, and the stevia just tasted far better than any of the other things that we tinkered with. Like there are people that are just adamant stevia is the worst thing in the world, and it's like, great, use something else. Like we can't accommodate everybody under every circumstance. But I also push back pretty hard because like people mentioned that stevia is used within indigenous populations that are local to stevia growing wildly. They have used it as a fertility suppressant, specifically in women. It's totally true, and they take monumentally large amounts of it to facilitate that process. So if I were a female who was trying to get pregnant and I was struggling, and I looked at, I was consuming huge amounts of stevia related products. And I mean, doing 8 or 10 elements a day isn't going to get you into that level. Like you'd have to be doing element and eating stevia in all of your meals and doing this. It would be really, really hard to get to a therapeutic dose in that regard, or like a concerning dose. But yeah, we went with stevia because I am super comfortable with the risk profile, and honestly, we just wanted the best tasting product. And we tried stevia, we tried monk fruit, we tried stevia and monk fruit. We did want to stay away from artificial sweeteners because that was just a fight I didn't want to have, because I'm from this like paleo ancestral health space, and I really am not overly concerned about those items in general, but there are people like it's just a whole other layer of stuff to deal with given my origin story. So that's largely why we opted out of that. I was trying to think if there was anything else around that, but yeah, again, like any one of these items, like I do believe that some people with sucralose and aspartame, they do get some gut upset, but some people report gut upset with monk fruit and stevia too. I mean, so it's a highly individual process. I will throw out there that just because a product or an item is natural from nature doesn't necessarily mean that it's better. This is one of these things that I just wrote a blog piece that hasn't been posted yet, but it talks about natural flavors, and like people just get their pearls clutched over this stuff. And there's, oh, you guys are unethical because you don't list what the natural flavors are. And it would, if we were to release a GC mass spec profile of what goes into a citrus flavor, it would be 100 items long, because natural products have a lot of different things in them, and that's part of the reason why they actually taste pretty good. It's the primary difference between something like natural vanilla extract, which has like 60 to 70 different constituents, versus artificial vanilla, which is one constituent. They have remarkably different flavor profiles. Both of them taste like vanilla. One of them has a really rich, expansive, holistic kind of flavor profile, and the other one is just like this very singular note of vanilla, and a vanilla version of vanilla. There's not a lot of subtlety to it. But the natural product stuff is interesting in that if we look at the most toxic substances known to humanity, we have some things like sarin nerve gas and things like that humans have made, but it's derivative off of things like fava beans and whatnot. Like they're derivatives of natural products that have just been tweaked. And by and large, the most toxic carcinogenic things that we know of are actually natural products. So just because it's natural doesn't necessarily mean that it's great for you. And just because something is artificial doesn't necessarily mean that it's bad for you either. Like on the flavoring side, artificial flavors usually are have a natural analog that are identical. But again, it's a fight I didn't want to fight, so we've just stayed within the quote natural and all that type of stuff.
Yeah, I don't blame you, because it does look better. It sounds better, thinking that it comes from a leaf. It just
right.
It does sound better. Another thing that here's one of the citrus one, but one thing I love about your product too is that something I didn't know, that women, when pregnant or breastfeeding, how important it is to, because it's something you don't even think about. You think about being electrolyte deficient and sodium deficient if you're an athlete or you're fasting, you're doing keto, carnivore. But you don't think about like pregnant women being electrolyte deficient, because they're also not just sharing their food, they're sharing their electrolytes, right?
Right. Yeah, we in particular the breastfeeding moms, gosh, it was the first year that we were in business. We just started getting tagged on social media, and it was interesting. It was exclusive breast pumping moms, and so there's different. Some moms are able to get the kid to latch, and they have the time to be able to exclusively breastfeed, and some are a mix, and some. Like my wife, she was a co-founder of a tech company, and we had a little bit of problems with the first daughter latching, and so she was an exclusive pumper, and then we would bottle feed but using breast milk. And it was kind of a white knuckler deal there oftentimes, because we were right on the edge of really producing enough milk oftentimes. And we started getting tagged on social media where these gals would say, here's what I produced yesterday, and it's like this itty bitty bottle with just a bare scant amount in the bottle. And it's like, I took some element and this is what I produced today, and it's like 5 bottles that are full. And I was like, holy smokes. And then I started thinking about the physiology and reread some of my medical physiology. I'm like, oh, well, of course this makes sense. Like, you need sodium to act as a co-transport molecule to move not just the electrolytes from inside the body to outside the body via the breast milk, but to move the proteins, the lactose, like all of the constituents in the milk need co-transport molecules to be able to move them through. And so just telling the mom to, quote, stay hydrated doesn't really mean anything. Hydration has turned into this term that is usually associated with just water. But if you look in like a medical physiology textbook, hydration is the water and the electrolytes that go with it. And if you can't really separate the two. And when you look mechanistically at breast milk production and the need for sodium in particular, you're like, oh, of course this makes sense. Just from the mechanistic side of moving fluids from inside the body to outside the body, not dissimilar to sweating. And then adequate sodium antagonizes cortisol release, and so that's beneficial for breast milk production. But yeah, it was absolutely not a category that we expected to get a bunch of buy-in from. But the pregnant breastfeeding moms, and in particular the exclusive pumping moms, like, we've just had huge loyalty and buy-in from that scene. It's been kind of crazy.
Yeah, and well, I think one of the thing about your products is like like my wife, the first time she tried it, and even myself, the first time I tried it, was a little salty. And I think that throughout the years we've been told that sodium leads to high blood pressure, and that there's all these bad things about it. You should minimize your salt intake. That we almost like got used to eating stuff and drinking stuff that wasn't salty, but then kind of get used to it. Like, I have a hard time drinking something that doesn't taste a little salty now. I actually like love it. I look forward to it, and I love the fact that you guys have chocolate too to put in hot drinks. And but as somebody like, so I fast all day. If I do need like a little pick me up or something, sometimes I will go to some of these things like these kombuchas that doesn't have any sugar in it, or these Jocko drinks, or sometimes I find that even just hydrating with Element gives me a little boost of energy throughout the day.
Yep.
And you realize, like, I'm like, oh wow, like my lack of energy sometimes isn't like because of a lack of caffeine or a lack of whatever it may be. Sometimes it's just a dehydration. And so many people out there, that's why I keep telling listeners, I'm like, so many people have symptoms that are directly, or at least are dehydration's making them worse, and could improve just by upping your electrolyte intake. And it's worth a try. And some headaches, migraines. I mean, my wife, when I first met her, she just always had migraines. I'm like, you don't drink enough. We go out to eat, we're eating salty food, we're drinking wine, we're having an espresso. I'm like, you haven't taken a sip of water, and then the next day you have a migraine.
Right.
Like, it's not it's no surprise. So and then if you're an athlete, I play sports a couple times a week. I play basketball and soccer, and I go to the gym probably more for mental health now at my age than physical health. Probably at least five days a week. And just the electrolytes seem to keep me going, keep me from cramping, so there's so many benefits to it. So I'm glad that you found this little hole in the market, and you realize, like, okay, this was something that's been neglected a little bit. And it kind of reminds me of like a Mark Sisson, right? It's like when he came up with Primal Kitchen, it was similar type of idea. It's like, oh, we're telling people to eat all these healthy salads and foods, but then the shit that we're putting on it isn't good for you, so
Right.
there's a there was a problem there, and then he fixed it. But I want to get into a little bit of the trend that food that really policy and all these other things. I know when you were on the last time you were on Rogan podcast, you talked about that Lancet study, and how it affects global policy, and all these things related to almost demonizing meat. And I had a buddy of mine in his late 20s. He's now in his 30s, but when he was in his late 20s, he was diagnosed with cancer. And I sent him like a podcast I did with Dr. Thomas Seyfried, who wrote the book Cancer as a Metabolic Disease. He was actually recommended to me by Dom D'Agostino. And all these podcasts and information, and then he brings it up to his doctor. He's like, oh, I'll bring it up to my doctor. I'm like, it's probably not going to go well. I'm not sure most doctors are very open-minded to other ways of thinking, but why not? And then the doctor says to him, I wouldn't worry too much about your glucose intake or anything like that. He's like, but I would watch the red meat. And I'm just like, really? And I know you have a history of cancer research. And I mean, one, is there any correlation between the two? I probably know the answer to this. I'm dumb. It's one of those questions I'm asking more for the listeners to hear the answer. But but also, why do you think there's, even with, like, it seems like the research is out there that there's tons of, I mean, I heard you also talking about like the Mediterranean diet. I was born in Portugal. You're absolutely right. Like, we eat tons of pork, every time people use like Mediterranean food, like, I'm like, I have friends from all over the world. I have friends that are Lebanese. They have a Mediterranean diet. They eat much different than we do. So I'm like, what is this general word that doesn't seem to make sense? I'm like, everybody eats different things. I'm like, I'm Portuguese. We eat slightly different. I mean, they don't even eat pork, and we eat tons of pork. So it's like, I'm like, use this blanket term, and it just sounds nice, but I'm like, it's not really it can't be scientific, because all these diets are slightly different in these countries. But do you think, why do you think there's a trend to demonize meat, and why do you think the doctors, like my buddy's doctor, are so behind the curve in regards to still kind of regurgitating what I thought was like debunked information?
God, man, there's a lot to unpack there. In our book Sacred Cow, Diana and I went through some of the history in the West, in particular, of kind of the rise of vegetarianism and veganism. If people, I'm 51 now, so I'm getting up there. But there was a great movie back in the mid '90s, The Road to Wellville, and it had Anthony Hopkins and some really notable characters in there. But it told the story of Harvey Kellogg, the guy that made like cornflakes, and he was in this. It's funny because naturopathic medicine kind of got it started in there, and you still see within naturopathy this really vegetarian, vegan kind of slanted orientation. But it's where a lot of like fasting and water therapies, hydrotherapy, and stuff like that was put together. But Kellogg and folks in his genre felt like meat was bad for the body, that there were these problems with the digestion and whatnot. And they had a very strong religious component in it, because the Seventh-day Adventist religion is kind of the foundational element of it. It is where modern dietetics came from and started from, and it is largely why RDs are so vegetarian in their orientation. And we kind of got into all those details. But Kellogg developed this cornflake to feed the people because he felt like when he did it, and he kept people on this kind of vegetarian, no meat, low nutrient density diet, their impure thoughts and sexual desires dramatically decreased, which was true. Like these people were malnourished, and when male or female, when you're malnourished, like your libido drops. It's one of the first signs of, when things are problematic. And so that's some of the history of where this stuff comes from. But there's lots of examples around the world of in and out group and food defining who those people are. Like there's some really gnarly stuff happening in India right now with like kind of Hindu nationalists going after Muslim populations, because the Muslims will consume beef, and clearly within Hindu religion, like that's kind of a problematic thing. Nazi Germany was largely a vegetarian movement wrapped up, and it was used to vilify the kosher practices of the Jewish population. And I mean, there's within the Khmer Rouge in Cambodia, there were some dietary distinctions within Cambodia that were also used to define in-group and out-group. And so this is a really common feature of when societies begin to fragment, or if you have a group that wants to define somebody as in versus out group. The science on, say, like red meat consumption, like you can't swing a dead cat and not find some correlational study that meat increases your cancer rate by this amount, and eating 3 eggs is as bad as a pack of cigarettes, and on and on and on. And I don't want to dismiss that, but it takes a little bit to unpack it. But it's the correlation versus causation. Some things can be correlated and not necessarily causal. The flip side is definitely true. But when you really dig into the literature on this type of research, what we find is that they're asking people to recall what they've eaten days, weeks, months, and sometimes years previously, and then write it down, and then do correlational studies with the people that claim to eat less meat. Were they healthier? And there's all this stuff like healthy user bias, where people will say, well, I don't eat meat because people perceive it to be a bad thing. So by and large, people seem to lie an enormous amount on these things. And then when we've done some better studies, like there was a study that looked at kind of the equivalent of like a Whole Foods market shopper. So you would assume a population that is probably making better diet and lifestyle choices broadly, like they're just a healthier population, probably less likely to smoke, probably not drink as much alcohol and stuff like that. What you found in that circumstance was a positive correlation between meat intake and longevity and reduced disease. And then currently, I mean, this one is one of to me, it's very compelling, but the longest lived population on the planet currently is Hong Kong. And they also happen to be the highest red meat consumption, which is nearly 2 pounds of red meat per day. And so it's yeah, I mean, I could throw out some other stuff there, but it's interesting that if you buy into the evolutionary biology story at all, like if we were hunter-gatherers for this protracted period of time, meat consumption has been with us for at least 1 million years, probably more like 2.5 million years as scavengers, and then eventually hunter-gatherers and whatnot. That doesn't guarantee that the food is going to be safe or benign for us, but it starts setting up a pretty interesting case that may be the facts that this is a safe and otherwise benign food for us to consume. And as Western populations' health have deteriorated over, say, like the last 30 years, the last 50 years, meat consumption has dropped. This is one of the things that's fascinating. Meat consumption has dropped. Overall processed food consumption and calories have increased. And so there's a real difficulty in squaring that stuff there. If this is some sort of a one-to-one linked story, as most of the kind of vegan oriented researchers and doctors would suggests then we should see the exact opposite occurring. We see a decrease overall in red meat consumption within the United States and westernized locations, but yet we see a clear worsening of health. And so, I don't know, I could go on, but those are some of the big ones. But this is one of the nice things about a book, in that you can lay out the case. Red meat is terrible for health, and then we can kind of go through and really ask the questions and lay out some case material. I'm like, well, if this is true, then we should see this, and we actually see all this data to the contrary. And yeah.
Well, and the other thing is it's white meat versus red meat, right? So, and then some people who do eat meat, even they have this bias philosophy on meat that it's like, oh, well, if I'm eating meat, I'm eating white meat, which is better for me than red meat. And what's your opinion on that? Is there any evidence that white, I mean, why do people seem to be kind of drawn towards chicken to be like the primary meat consumption? For me, I kind of take after Joe Rogan when he says, I don't eat weak birds. I'm the same way. Like, I don't eat chickens unless it's like, maybe there's a chicken dish that seems really interesting that I might want to try or whatever. But typically, like, it's pork or beef. Like, I don't eat a whole lot of chicken. But why do people have this belief that chicken is the better option?
So credibly, like, the most credible thing that I've seen is that there was a thought that the heme iron in red meat could be pro-inflammatory, and that actually is like, okay, that's reasonable. Ended up not being the case, and also when you look at the difference in nutrient density between red meat and chicken. Chicken is still better than vegetables, but barely. Like, red meat is so much more nutritionally dense per calorie than chicken is. And a really ironic thing there. So there's a lot of things. One is that just the fact that chicken is white, like, it almost looks like tofu, particularly after it's cooked, and especially if you do like the boneless, skinless chicken breast, and like every fiddly bit has been whittled off of it. It's almost like I don't even know what this is, and if it's been all cubed up, like, it could be like sag paneer, or cheese, or tofu or something, for all you would know. It's not red, it's not bloody in the same way that just like a T-bone steak is. So I think that there's all kinds of just kind of perceptual things around that. What's really unfortunate is that chicken has this kind of green halo around it, that it's more sustainable, and there just could be nothing further from the truth. And it's funny because I'll sit down with kids. I've been invited to speak at some like elementary schools and some high schools, and the elementary kids get this. The older the person gets, the more difficult it is to get them to the truth. Like, it's more work. But I'll ask kids, I'm like, what do cows eat? Like, grass. Damn straight. Yes, they eat grass. What do chickens eat? And then they eat a little bit of grass. And it's like, yeah, they'll pick at a little bit of grass. What do they eat? Does anybody here have chickens? They're like, oh, they eat grains. Yes, they eat grains, and so are grains used to finish cattle? Yeah.
Oh, you froze. Rob, I lost you for a second. Oh, you're back. Okay.
Okay, you're back. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, yeah, you were telling the chicken story that
yeah.
Sorry.
No problem. I live in rural Montana, so it's probably my side of the connection. It's terrible. But yes, kids, what do chickens eat? And they'll say bugs and maybe a little bit of grass. But at the end of the day, chicken and pork, ironically, are 100% fed on grains and legumes, which are exclusively this product of the industrial row crop food system. Whereas cattle are amazing. Like, there are different ruminant animals, but cattle, because they have these four stomachs, basically, like they get so much nutrition out of the food that they consume. They're so much better than horses and deer and things like that. Like they're really remarkable in that regard. They can take just remarkably low quality material and turn it into arguably the best, highest quality food that humans can consume. And grass is this kind of essentially free item because rain falls on the land makes grass, the cows eat the grass, and again, some people supplement them with grains and whatnot. That can be a sustainable process if it's done properly, but when chicken is and also pork, but chicken in particular is held up as a more sustainable item, it is completely false. That is bullshit. Like it's not, because they're eating things that the inputs are inherently more energy dense, more energy intensive than a ruminant eating grass. And I would also make the case that the lives of these animals, like they're much more in that like confined area feeding scenario throughout their whole life, whereas cattle are, even again, like your Costco and your Walmart beef that you eat, they spend 70% of their life on grass outside, and then they get finished at feedlots. And even that feedlot finishing, it's kind of gnarly from our perspective, but cows are herd animals. They're actually more comfortable in large groups packed more together than they are being spread out. It's actually a stressor. For like, having one cow is remarkably stressful on the cow. You actually need several cows. Same deal with horses. It's not that comfortable of an existence for them to exist singularly. So I know I'm kind of rambling now, but I mean, those are some of the broad brushstrokes around like the white meat, red meat story. And it's been really compelling. Like, people really buy into it. And it on the surface, it seems to make a lot of sense. Like, it just seems like, oh, chickens are cleaner animals, but they're really not. And their inputs are more taxing on the environment. Grass is a really sustainable item. And we have 2/3 of the Earth's landmass are grasslands, and they're really amenable for nothing other than growing grass and growing the animals that live on grass. And this is the way that these areas have evolved over the last 100 million years. We've had some sort of a grassland ecosystem interface going on there, and now we have people suggesting that is going to destroy the planet. And it's I don't want to say it's ridiculous, but it's so divorced from reality. It is ridiculous. Like, when you really walk people through this process, you're like, okay, so we're blaming the totality of climate change, which many people do, on ruminant animals. And then we walk through what happens with ruminants, and that it's part of a carbon cycle. The carbon that is in the belched methane that the animal lets out was carbon dioxide in the air that became part of a plant, that then became part of the animal, and it gets released and is going to be part of the carbon cycle again, versus looking at what comes out of the tailpipe of a car or a jet airplane. These are very, very different input routes, but yet the outflow of animal husbandry has been called the primary driver of climate change, erroneously. But it's kind of like peeing in a pool. Like, this claim has been made at various points, even at like the World Economic Forum level. And then people will say, no, that's not true. And then they'll do a retraction, but it's already out in the wild. Then now you have millions of people that believe that ruminant animals like cattle are the primary driver of climate change. And if you really think climate change is important, and I do, it might be to our benefit to actually have the facts straight on that, so that we can put our limited resources in a direction that actually matters, versus chasing something that is a non-issue in the overall story of climate change.
So it sounds like eating chicken is like driving a Tesla. It's like, it makes you feel better, but
Absolutely,
you're not asking you're not going deep into is it actually helping the world and environment, because there's still a battery that you still need to get rid of, and there's still factory farms that are not treating these chickens very well. So if you're trying to help the community or feel like you're doing something of some value, of some moral value, maybe you should reconsider eating chicken. And that's a argument that Dr. Sean Baker makes all the time. It's like that, you look at chickens, it just, beef lives a much better life than a chicken does, so,
Yeah.
yeah, well, without a doubt. I mean, let's say, I want to. I mean, I'm there's so many things I want to talk to you about, and I don't know how much time you have, so I don't. I'm gonna try to maybe go down the rabbit holes that I know people listening are probably more interested in. It's something you talked about in I've listened to a lot of your own podcasts and interviews that you've done, so I never know where the source of this came from. But one of the things you talked about was food being intellectual property, and that's something I've talked a lot about on the show. It seems like everything's about demonizing the human. And take off the jacket. We're going to get deep in this rabbit hole. Everything seems to be about demonizing like humans, like we are the worst virus on this earth, demonizing how we live, everything we do, and then also about controlling everything. And you look at like the trend of we've talked about Bill Gates on the show a bunch about him buying a bunch of farmland and why would he want to do that, and the fact that like you're kind of slowly with the meatless Mondays things and trying to like demonize meat and slowly putting it in a kid's psyche. And you talked about it's much easier to get to talk to a child about food and nutrition than an older person, because a lot of times you've been all the propaganda, all the years of propaganda has finally changed your or has molded your worldview when you're an adult, and it's hard to kind of undo that. Where children, they're still curious and they're still in the process of molding their worldview. So it's like if you can kind of get in there and kind of plant some seeds of doubt on what mainstream reality is telling you, then hopefully you can get them to kind of open their minds to different perspectives. But do you think that this trend, because it seems like it's not, none of it's science based and none of it has any actual evidence that it's helping the environment or it's helping climate change or whatever the hell they want to call it, and it so the only other solution would be controlling, it's about control, it's about controlling the food source, it's about do you think there's anything to that, because you are deep into science and all that stuff? I mean, do you think that the motives are maybe just misunderstanding what is actually good for you and what's not good for you, or is it something deeper than that?
If I keep my tinfoil hat off and try to keep it as above board as I can, I think I think someone like Bill Gates, although really, really smart, he gets clearly influenced by some erroneous information. The interesting thing is folks can be very adept in one area and not particularly well steeped in another area.
And wasn't the Gates Foundation a part of that Lancet study that you
yeah
guys
yeah they're funders of a ton of this stuff. And so let's give him the benefit of the doubt and just say that he's he buys the full anthropogenic climate change story that we're going to literally destroy the planet, which I actually don't agree with that. Like, the planet has been warmer and colder at various points, and there's just challenges associated with both of those. I will say that ice ball Earth is a way more challenging place to live than a globally warmer planet, and it doesn't mean that there won't be challenges to deal with sea level rises and stuff like that. But I like to point out the Netherlands has been dealing with sea level rises for 600 years. 2/3 of their country is below sea level, and they've been dealing with that by building dikes and levees, and they are one of the largest exporters of food in Europe because they've built and planned and done this stuff. And human beings are just remarkably fucking adaptable if we give people good information, but low-lying sea level areas are going to need to make choices around what they do, and maybe it's dikes and levees, maybe it's relocating some populations. There are going to be other areas, like the interior of Siberia and Canada that are likely to become far more productive as far as places for people to live, and more mild winters and longer, better summers for growing seasons. All this stuff is being painted as if it is just a 100% net negative. It's all bad. We're all going to die. And it's just not true. And there's a great book from a guy, and you might have him on your show, Stephen Koonin. He wrote a book called Unsettled. He was the energy secretary under President Obama, and he's a physicist by training. And he was called upon to do a review of the total impact of climate change on the United States and kind of the world writ large. And so he went into it with, he's a physicist, so he's very good at data analysis and he understands systems and whatnot. But he went into it expecting to see a lot of gloom and doom. And when he actually read the primary research, it's not that big of a deal. And I'm going to discredit myself by saying that, but that's the only thing I can say. And I'm not saying that climate change doesn't happen. I'm not saying that we don't need to make decisions around it. What I am saying is that the scientists putting out the worst case scenarios are not actually that bad, and they're not actually all bad. Like there's give and take with this thing depending on where you are in the world and what the situation is and whatnot. And there's a huge amount of unknown in this thing. Like people set this up as if we know exactly what's going to happen, but yet we just had, we had the 2008 financial crisis, which was a bunch of people managing a global economic system, which is staggeringly complex, but is fractionally as complex as a global ecological system. And I forget if it was Greenspan or Bernanke, but he the guy running the Fed at the time, he's like, we have offloaded risk. And that was bullshit. They had just repackaged and redistributed risk in these mortgage-backed securities, and the whole thing just about burned the whole fucking planet down, from a global economic perspective. So when these folks make these just august statements about it, we know exactly what's happening. And also, like we're right now we're in this banking crisis. We had Silicon Valley Bank drop, and then some other banks, and it looks like a ton of banks are insolvent because of the way that they have bought treasuries on a long dated thing, and then interest rates went up. These people didn't predict this; they didn't see it coming. There's all but yet we act as if we have this great control over the world, our economics, our environment, and it's a lie. Like we have models, and sometimes the models are good and oftentimes they're misleading, but even within this story, the worst case predictions within these climate change models are really not remotely as bad as what is put forward by the media, like the Greta Thunbergs, that like we should all be dead by now effectively because we didn't halt CO2 emissions entirely. I know I'm totally getting off into the weeds, but
no, but you're right. I mean, you go back to the 70s and you look at the environmentalists back then. If you look at their predictions, like we should all be dead right now. Like in
the 70s, they were predicting an ice age. Like when I was growing, when I literally was a kid, there you can still see Time magazine articles. It's like, we have an ice age coming. We need to prepare for this. How are we going to deal with this? And then the whole thing pivoted into global warming, and then when the global warming thing didn't really pan out because the whole planet isn't warming, some places were warming, some places getting colder, then it became climate change, where it's just kind of like, well, the climate changes. And it's like, yeah, it absolutely does. Like the weather changes day to day and globally. And that's how, and again, like even what I've said, some percentage of your listeners, the fact that I've pushed back even a little bit on the standard narrative, they're like, that guy's an asshole. He doesn't know what he's talking about. He's a right-wing conspiracy theorist, even though I'm like a left of center libertarian. So, it's kind of like, okay, whatever. But, back to like the Bill Gates gig and all of this, the narrative has been that we're in this like dire existential crisis. And so I think that if you take that seriously, then you jump in, you're like, okay, well, what are we going to do about this? And then you're told, well, animal husbandry is the primary driver of this. Wink, wink, nod, nod. Like, definitely don't look at your private jet or your 600-foot yacht as contributors to this thing, Bill Gates. It's all the hamburgers that people are eating. And then Bill gets in and starts buying up farmland like crazy. And now he's the largest private owner of farmland, which produces the raw materials to make things like Impossible Burger and Beyond Meat. And these things were held up as these, ethically superior options and environmentally superior options. But yet there were life cycle analyses comparing Impossible Burger to like White Oak Pastures, which is this regenerative, food production in Georgia. And it was an independent life cycle analysis outfit that did this. I think it's called Quanta, and they showed that for every White Oak Pasture hamburger that was eaten, you needed to eat, for every Impossible Burger that was eaten, you needed to eat one White Oak Pasture to cancel out the Impossible Burger's carbon footprint, because the White Oak Pastures was a net carbon negative and the Impossible Burger was a net carbon positive. And this was a huge deal for like 2 days. And then the media just dropped it and everybody was like, okay, go find something else to look at, because it just completely blew a hole in the narrative around this idea that these lab grown meats and these fake meats are ecologically superior. And more recently, what we've been finding is these things are failing economically. Like they just don't turn a profit because they're so goddamn expensive to make, because they're so inefficient, because it takes so much energy, and the energy is where all of this carbon footprint comes from. This thing again, where like sunlight, grass, and grazing animals is super fucking efficient. Like biology has had billions of years to tweak and fiddle that system. I mean, from the dinosaurs on, basically, there's been some sort of a grassland herbivore interface that has been a primary feature of the earth, other than like in glaciation periods. And even then we had these megafauna like woolly mammoth and woolly rhinos and everything that existed on these steppe grasslands. So these companies are failing now, like rather spectacularly, and it's because they can't turn a profit. Impossible Burger is twice as expensive per pound as grass-fed meat, as the equivalent cut of grass-fed meat, twice as expensive. But yet it's held up as being more moral, more ethical, more environmentally friendly, and all of that is just a lie. But it's easy PR and marketing that like the vegans and the state-run media, they just make these statements, or like Impossible Burger is great for the environment and it's more ethical and it'll save the planet. And they could just say this and there's nobody there fact checking that other than us. It's left upon us to fact check those things. And then when we fact check, someone like me fact checks it, someone like you fact checks it, we're labeled a right-wing, extremists. That we are climate change denialists, and on and on and on. Whereas it's like, no, I don't argue the existence of the greenhouse effect. That's a reality. What I challenge is the conclusions based around the data that we have at hand, and the dire conclusions, and in particular vilifying grazing animals as like the primary vector of concern within this whole story. If there's stuff that we need to do to shore up our risk exposures going forward as a world, then we really need to understand where the legitimate danger is and where the legitimate solutions are. And this is the other really ironic feature of all this, is that well-managed grazing animals can and do sequester more carbon than they release. So if you really are concerned about excess carbon in the atmosphere and water retention in the ground and all these other things, well-managed grazing animals are a solution to that. And they produce food and they produce local economic infrastructure. So we have vilified one of the most robust and remarkable tools that we have for nutrient-dense food, for carbon sequestration, for mitigating topsoil erosion, and on and on and on. We've painted the cow as this like horrible entity that should be done away with, and we should just grow our food in the lab.
Yeah, I had to. I remember when before the Cowspiracy was released, they hit me up and they're like, "Oh, there's this movie. We want to have the filmmakers on the show." And I like the title. I'm like, "Cowspiracy." I'm like, maybe it's about the conspiracy about how they demonize cows, which it wasn't at all. And I'm like, I can't have these guys on. I'm like, I'm not even intelligent enough to debunk them one argument at a time, because a lot of times these guys come with the fire. They have all the information right there. And then it's like, okay, I'm not certain, but I don't have the time during a show to look at the counter argument and dissect all that. But people should be wary of the government and experts in general. I mean, we saw during the COVID lockdowns and throughout history with the environmentalists, like you said, first it was global cooling, which I tend to agree 100%. It's much more of a concern. Like, it's how do you grow food when everything's frozen over? It's
Right.
grow food when it's nice out, and there's all these other issues with, like, in regards to the health, autoimmune issues. You're seeing an increase in autoimmune issues. You're seeing an increase, and it could be, I mean, you see people who have success with the carnivore diet. I mean, it could be related to a lot of our processed foods and our crappy eating. You look at like isolation and people being less social, less communal. And COVID obviously did not help with people working at home and stuff. I mean, that leads to a bunch of health issues, in regards to just mentally. If you're depressed, if you're sad, if you don't have community, if you don't have purpose, if you don't have fulfillment, then physically you're going to start falling apart too, and
Right.
we're just like trending in a direction of like, let's just convince the world that like the earth is ruined by humans are awful, download your consciousness into a robot and just all be cyborgs. Like, I kind of feel like that's
Right.
the end game.
Yeah, I mean, this transhumanist movement is super fucked up, in my opinion. Like, that's maybe a thing that we could do on a different show at a later time. But I just to cement my position as a lunatic fringe person, like I definitely put human life above all other life on this planet. Does not mean that we should like piss down the backs of all other life and abuse it. And this is the only planet we've got. And although I'm optimistic that we will get off this planet at some point, it's going to be a big lift, and it's not remotely guaranteed that we pull that off. So it really behooves us to take care of this one home that we have. But all of that stuff said, I am not in that camp that views humanity as a scourge. We may be the only intelligent life like us in the universe, which is just kind of jaw-dropping, and I think puts a degree of responsibility on us to not fuck this stuff up that's rather remarkable. And I think that there, without a consciousness like what we have, I think that that's something really important and worth preserving and protecting. So I am not in that like transhumanist, like humans are a locus that needs to be contained and eradicated. I'm kind of in the opposite thing. I think we need to spread as far and wide as we possibly can to risk mitigate the potential that we do destroy ourselves or some cataclysmic event wipes out humanity. So yeah, for whatever that's worth.
Yeah, the future's scary. I have two little ones also. I have a son and a daughter, and I bring them to the local butcher shop. I like them to have some relation with the food that they're eating. They see it cut. It's not a big deal. It's just meat. I mean, I grew up watching my parents skin rabbits, and to me, it wasn't a big deal. My parents, I would walk in the garage and there's a giant pig hanging upside down. That was like life to me. It was just, I understood that by the time by the time the food got to my plate, that there was a process and there was a journey that food and that living animal took to get there. And it's not like it just magically appears on your plate and just forget about the fact that it was living or whatnot.
Right.
We have this serious issue with just not, like, it's almost like we look at humans as we're not a part of the environment. We're not a part of the whole cycle of life. We're this other thing. And it's like, no, life eats life. And that's how we all survive. And it doesn't mean you don't appreciate. You hear it with hunters all the time, how much they appreciate the food because they saw it alive. They're a process, it's almost like it's a sacrifice, right? That, to eat this food, and you appreciate it because you saw it alive. And you probably appreciate it much more than getting that, that cheap chicken full of, antibiotics or whatever at the store packaged, and it barely looks like food. So, yeah, without a doubt, I know you're limited on time. You're a very busy man with one of the fastest growing companies in the world, and but for people listening who want to keep up with your work, want to keep up with, I know you and your wife have a podcast, and which I like the small talk between you and your wife, because we have the same issues with trying to find a show that my wife and I both enjoy. Your wife was talking about how she doesn't like her entertainment to be stressful. I'm like, that's kind of the enjoyment of it. I like the feels. It's like all art, music, TV, whatever it is. Like, I want to feel something, and I want it to be a experience. So, but it kind of makes sense. Like, you know what? Why can't my pastime be just enjoyable and not stressful and not take me into dark places? But I think I side with you more on that. But let people know where they can get the podcast, anything else you have going on. Obviously Sacred Cow, it's a book, it's a movie, where they can get that, and anything else.
Yeah. RobbWolf.com is kind of the main hub. We do a weekly podcast called The Healthy Rebellion. You can track down Sacred Cow, the book and film, at RobbWolf.com. And then I'm getting back into some writing, and I have a Substack, RobbWolf.substack.com, and that's kind of where you'll find the bulk of what I'm doing.
Awesome. I'll put all that stuff in the show description. Thanks again, Robb, for taking time out of your busy day to chat. Hopefully we chat again in the near future. I'll send you links to the show once it's up and live, and enjoy the rest of your day. I really appreciate it.
Thanks. Take care.
Thanks, Robb. Take care.